Have you ever encountered true evil? How? I worked with a narcissist. It made me question my concept of good and evil. He was undoubtedly a negative impact on the workplace. He created drama, conflict, and hurt morale. But I don't think he had any choice in the horrible things he did. I'm not sure if narcissists are born or made, but he really couldn't help himself. My former housemaster at boarding school. This man loved to beat students. He was known for it. Everyone feared this man. His name alone would send you running. The day I realized that he was a true sadist was when he was beating this kid for stealing, and he told me and some other kids to hold him by his legs and arms. He came back with canes that were as thick as mop sticks. When I saw those, I realized he was a sadist, though that word was not one I used even though I knew what the word was. It just dawned on me how truly evil that man was. He went out of his way to get these ridiculously thick canes to use to beat 10 to 18-year-olds. After he beat you, he would make you clear half a tennis court's worth of land until it was completely bare. This would take people hours to do. He would make people miss mandatory school programs that you could get suspended for not attending. A teacher asked a student who was under punishment cutting grass who punished him, and he said who. The teacher said oh. The other teachers knew this man and his reputation in the dorms. He also created a specific stress position punishment. We named it after him. It was a modification of one of the common stress position punishments. It was regular thing to hear people screaming in the morning while getting a beating from him. If you took it without making a sound and squirming, he would make it worse by hitting you more or getting a wire, certain belts that hurt more, a thick cane, and other whipping instruments. I do not recall him having an actual whip, but he probably did have one. He also used to use mop sticks. Sometimes he would come back from a night of drinking and look for people who stayed up when they were supposed to be asleep and beat them. He once went to a whole other dormitory that he was not in charge of in the middle of the night to beat a kid that he saw from about 100 meters away. He could not open the gate like he could in the dormitories he was in charge of because he was not the housemaster of those dorms. So he got out of his apartment and delivered the slaps through the gate. This butthole was also a teacher and would act all nice in class, and the girls liked him. They had no idea how much the bastard terrorized us and did not really care when they were informed. The school knew that he was brutal and would sometimes ban him from beating students, but he would just get an older student to beat them instead, and eventually he would resume the beating. He also still had his favorite stress position and making you clear grass. Every week there was a cleanliness inspection, and almost every week the dormitories he was in charge of won. He made people clean like crazy, and I think it was just a part of his need to control and dominate us. That man seriously scared the crap out of me. I did 5 tours of Bosnia during the war, 3 as a UN peacekeeper and 2 under NATO jurisdiction. I have seen what people on both sides did to people who were former friends and neighbors. The most frightening thing about it was that the people carrying out these acts weren't sociopaths. They were teachers, doctors, shopkeepers, and farmers. They simply felt justified in doing it. Saw lots of grisly things. True evil lives inside us all. It just takes the right situation to draw it out. I thought I was above it, but more than once I seriously considered slotting someone. I knew what they had done, and a part of me thought that was good enough to decide that they had earned a bullet. One day I realized that I was no different to them. I just had more discipline and restraint when it came to my impulses. And most of us felt that way. Seeing what we did day after day, week after week affects you no matter how hard you try to block it out. I think that is what scares me most about that time. I unknowingly dated a narcissist. I knew something was wrong with him on our first date when I looked into his eyes. They were just cold, dead, empty, like he had no soul. I was instinctively unsettled, but he was also smart, shy, and handsome, and I figured maybe he had high-functioning autism, so I brushed it off as social awkwardness. Wrong. He went on to be incredibly manipulative, abusing me in such subtle ways I was always doubting myself, and by the time he left me he had worn me down to a husk of the person I once was. We only dated for a few months, yet he managed to destroy me before I could figure out what was even happening. I never knew there were people like that in the world. People who are truly evil, and it rocked me to my core. I have been in therapy for years recovering from this. Always trust your first instincts. My former best friend was like this. I don't think she was a full-blown narcissist, but had tendencies and some type of personality disorder. I could write a book about all the manipulative stories, lies, and exaggerations she used to isolate, gaslight, and control me. I will probably have to go to therapy before I'll feel ready to make new friends. It was a dude who was committing health insurance fraud, who got caught, but had pulled up to the building in a brand new Audi and came up the elevator in a new suit acting smug as frick about getting away with it. That's the dumbest thing someone could do. Depends on how you would describe an encounter. I used to work with RPAs, drones, in the Air Force, so, as you can imagine, I have seen a lot of crap. I remember very clearly we were on station overlooking an ISIS-controlled city and we observed a massing of people. In the center of the crowd were a couple executioners and prisoners. With there being a large crowd around, there was nothing we could do, so we watched as heads literally rolled after being chopped from the bodies. Crazy to think that what I was watching on my screen on the other side of the world was real and happening at that very moment. Early in my news career, I viewed footage of genocide victims exacting revenge on people from the ethnic community that had committed genocide against them. The video showed an entire extended family bound hand and foot inside a house. In the middle of the main room was a huge pile, maybe 6-8 feet tall. It was a pile of body parts. It was hard to see anything because of what I first thought was extreme static on the video. Then I realized it wasn't static, it was blood spray. People were hacking the pile with swords and blood was spraying up in huge arcs. One by one people were added to the pile and stabbed, hacked to death. The killers were slathered in blood and dancing in celebration as they killed. It taught me that we're all capable of the most horrible acts, and that evil begets more evil. You'd think people who'd seen their entire families' communities murdered would want nothing to do with murder. But you'd be wrong. Vengeance and hatred can make people do anything. I was trafficked, beaten, starved, insulted, ridiculed, psychologically toyed with, force-fed fesses, kicked by steel-toed biker boots, stabbed, shot, sexually tortured, abandoned, and much more. I knew evil. His name was Dad. I hope you're well now. My stepmother's 6-year-old nephew is showing all the signs of being a sociopath and a sadist. He has severely physically harmed several students in his school, including trying to drown a classmate in the toilet several times. He once tried to strangle a little girl. He locked his older sister in a metal garden shed with a padlock for 4 hours in 100-degree weather and lied about it when asked. The police were called because his mom thought it was a kidnapping. They heard the girl screaming and released her. Their dog had puppies and they kept one. He slammed the dog's head in a car door, killing it. He routinely holds a lit lighter to his body, including his genitalia. He enjoys hurting others. These people live in the mountains, and to get from their house to town they have to come down the mountain, so a road that is on the edge of the mountain. The little boy unbuckled himself as his mom was driving around a bend where there was a 200-foot drop on the other side and put his hands over her eyes. More recently, he found a belt with a metal buckle and started beating a neighborhood kid with it. One morning his mother came into the kitchen to get breakfast ready and found him hiding behind the doorway with a large knife. She dodged just in time as he swung at her. Even more recently, his aunt gave birth to a new baby. My step-aunt woke to go get the baby for a feeding and couldn't find him. They looked everywhere. The 6-year-old was watching with a smile. They eventually found the baby in the dryer, asleep but sweaty. The boy regularly physically attacks his mother and sister, leaving them bloody and bruised. A few months ago I went up for stepmom's birthday and the little boy was present. We were all staying the night at the house. He spent the whole day being sweet and loving towards me until nighttime, when suddenly he stared at me with these horrible emotionless eyes and told me he didn't like me anymore and wanted me to leave. He then went around the hall and stared at me for a while. I didn't sleep that night. ETA. Okay folks, I can't answer every single response. I cannot verify the details because this is Reddit, so I can't make anyone believe me anyway. However, I have posted about this child once before. This is the shorter version. The child has since has punishment and treatment and all sorts of other medical intervention. He will not be attending public school this year. He's currently in an outpatient program with an aide who goes everywhere with him. He lives at home because they have no other option. There's no institution that will take a child as young as 6. Not in their area of Virginia. It's literally the mountain boonies. And these are not wealthy people. The kid is on Medicaid. They're doing their best with what they have. I live 10 hours away from them and their distant relatives. All of my info is from a reliable second hand, but I trust my info. So get up out of my comments. Y'all are irritating me. Dude, he needs to go to a mental hospital. I owned a business with somebody who has narcissist personality disorder. That guy doesn't have a soul. In retrospect, it is very clear that narcissists have no empathy for others. There was no end to his lies, manipulation, and bullying, all done with a clear conscience. When I was younger, I spent a lot of time in Yahoo chat rooms looking for sexual roleplay with strangers. I had a very easygoing approach to people's kinks because for me, it was more about just having someone's attention, and indulging their shade of perversion was a very effective way to get that attention. So one night I meet this person who's into non-consensual stuff. He wanted to write a rape in a bathroom type scene. Okay, sure, why not? Most people, guys in particular, will talk a big game but never cross a line that would outright end the play because it can be hard to find a partner to play with. Be silly for guys. So I wrote about the struggle, about fighting back some and refusing. At this point most partners would get more physical and threatening, but that's it. This one wrote a very detailed post about cutting my throat just like he threatened he would if I didn't go along with his demands. It was incredibly unexpected and without question the most chilling experience I've ever had online with someone. I often wonder if that was his outlet to keep from doing something like that offline, or if he ever progressed from writing it to doing it. When I was 16, there was a guy in my year in boarding school with me called Niall who was also 16. He was short and stocky and weirdly strong for his age. He was a tyrant and a bully. He would fly off the handle at the smallest little inconvenience and bully the younger years. I felt sorry for the younger years that he picked on. I would try and go out my way and help them if they were being picked on by this guy because I hated him and he had no reason to pick on them. He had been warned multiple times to change his ways, but as the old saying goes, a cheetah can't change its spots. One day after school I was chilling in the common room with some friends just shooting the breeze, when a younger year student called Luke ran into the room. He was in first year, so he was only 11 or 12. He was bawling his eyes out and grasping his wrist for dear life. We all got up and asked what was wrong with him. Through the tears and the screaming he said that Niall had pushed him into an empty classroom and cut his wrist multiple times with the blade out of a pencil sharpener. We immediately brought him to the nurse and she had to send him to hospital for stitches. She was asking what had happened and we explained to her what Luke had told us about Niall. The school nurse was a 60-year woman who one of the most gentle people I have ever met, but after hearing what had happened to Luke she was furious. It was like someone had done that to her own child. She was on the warpath. Immediately she went to the principal, vice principal, Niall's housemaster and his year head to tell them what he had done. Niall denied all these accusations until the cameras were checked showing him doing what he had denied to Luke in the classroom. Niall was expelled immediately and Luke's parents filed criminal charges against him. Niall ended up completing his secondary level education in a juvenile detention prison. Last I heard he was still in prison because he stabbed a guy when he was in juvenile detention. The only good thing that came of this is that after the incident there was a zero bullying policy strictly enforced in school and claims could be made confidentially to a person away from prying eyes. I truly believe that Niall was evil and a psychopath. Yes, I took a date to the comedy club and the stand-up did a bit about how freaking evil Nestle was. The date objected to his language, then blamed the impoverished mothers in developing countries for being too stupid to properly prepare the baby formula Nestle sold them. Should have swiped left on that B. Ah yes, because women in developing countries should have just used their smartphones to Google Nestle and realize they were being hustled. Not me, but I had a professor in college who told us a story about when he had to interrogate a serial rapist. The man was going around town and kidnapping young men, then sodomized them with a length of lead pipe. As soon as my professor looked in the man's eyes and said he saw absolutely nothing, just a black void, the man confessed to his crimes with a smile on his face and not even a hint of remorse, just spoke about them like he was talking about buying a gallon of milk. I worked with a man that clearly had sociopathic tendencies. He had a history of mild to moderate traumatic brain injuries due to his need to participate in risky activities. He showed signs of having high-functioning autism, but he was afraid to be diagnosed. He said that he never felt any emotion and did not feel a connection to anyone. He was fascinated by the thought of suicide and murder. He worked at a large auditorium where they host large events with many people in attendance. One day, he came to see me and told me that he had been reading about mass shooters, that many of them have autism. He felt that autism was an excuse to be a mass shooter. It was bone-chilling to think that he worked in a place that held large amounts of people, was obsessed with mass shootings, and felt that his very likely autism diagnosis was an excuse for mass shootings. Truly evil. My old boss was a pure sociopath of the kind you think only exists in TV. He goes into a new town every few years and tries to ruin as many lives as possible. He's responsible for multiple suicides and worse. There have been several articles written about him because he is so charming and good at conning people. I asked him once what he thinks of people and his answer was honestly, I hate them all. They're all freaking stupid and they deserve to be taken for everything they have. He tried to get me to murder my girlfriend. My father's cousin. My dad went on a business trip to a country in Asia for 2 years, and me and my sister went down south in the country to live with my mom. So my dad rented his apartment to his cousin and his wife. He stopped paying after 6 months, blaming it on being short on money, and then just ignored his calls after a year. When my dad went home after his business trip, me and my sister went with him back to his apartment to live there because there was closer to some better schools and gymnasiums. What we entered was an empty apartment. Everything had been picked clean. Our fridge, microwave that was in the wall, beds, TVs, couches, etc. What remained was a toilet, bathtub, and a kitchen bench, a stove and a sink. My dad was devastated. There were no signs of break-in either since the door wasn't damaged, so we instantly knew who did it. Things eventually worked out after 3.5 years. We're living the normal life again, but I'm unsure what happened to my dad's cousin in the court cases. As far as I know, he's somewhere in Finland with his wife and kids. I've met a few sociopaths in my life. The scary thing about them is how normal and likable they can be. I met this one guy who was super chill and I thought to be a cool person. We would always hang out, and at the time, I thought we were good friends. I started to trust him a lot more, but then started to notice some weird behaviors and caught him lying a bunch. He was also very inconsistent with his stories. He would tell a story to me then tell it to other people. However, the story would always change and even had different people. Then I started to realize he was pretty much lying to everyone and was manipulating everyone in my friend circle. He was very smooth and had a lot of charisma and girls would always flock to him. I eventually found out that he pretty much used and manipulated all those girls, then realized he never liked me as a friend either. He pretty much just kept me around for his own benefit, either to have someone to talk to or to use me as an opportunity to meet other girls. It's just crazy how people like that can switch it on and off so easily. They can pretend to be your friend all while absolutely hating you. They're also very clever and witty when it comes to making up stories, or finding ways of making you feel like they can be trusted. I work for a criminal court, and I've done so for 6 years now. In that time, there's only one defendant who I think was truly evil. He had committed a home invasion on a 90-year-old woman. He tied her to a chair and then stabbed her. He supposedly said what drove him to stab her was when she told him that she forgives him and that God still loves him. He stood not 2 feet away from me while he pled guilty. Zero remorse shown. If anything, he exhibited feeling of pride. I'm pretty late, but this story still gets me to this day. In my local church group there was this single mother who had been part of the group for years. She wasn't hard to work with, but she wasn't someone you really wanted to be around. You know the type. She gets married to a Native American guy with 4 kids, 2 in middle high school and the others are young. The boy in middle school is autistic, but is relatively normal and wants to do normal things. Partway through high school, the boy gets into an accident while at wrestling practice and breaks his back and is paralyzed from the waist down. The whole community rallies behind him. Hospital bills, therapy, a new electric wheelchair, the whole 9 yards. Totally taken care of. A new house was even built that had access ramps leading up to it and different contractors donated time and materials for him. Well, at some point during this whole ordeal, this kid's dad came to the conclusion that these 2 older kids are actually his. So while this poor kid is undergoing physical therapy to regain the use of his legs, the family starts charging him rent in the house that was built for him. This kid is great, by the way. Decided, okay, I'll pay rent. I'll get a job at McDonald's. Instead of his parents giving him a ride to and from work, they made him ride his electric scooter to and from work, about 10 miles one way. At one point the parents took the scooter away and tried selling it, but members of our church caught wind of it and went to the house and stole it back. He's currently living about an hour away from those evil people and doing much better, but I've never seen anyone be so heartless to another human being before in my life. Oh, and they are consistently in need of financial assistance from our church, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but they have a house that was practically free, and they still struggle to pay bills. For context, this happened in Utah, and it is indeed the Mormon church. My wife works in the air. She told me about a patient who had to be restrained after biting and drawing blood of 2 nurses, attempting to gouge eyes, foaming at the mouth, gashing his own chest with his fingernails. Eyes would roll back and he'd cuss the most vile and evil things at her, eventually put into some kind of zip and mesh cage restraint. Then his wife walked in and asked why he was restrained, and he immediately resumed complete normal behavior. Doctors told her, and she called them liars to their face and said in 20 plus years of marriage he had never acted out, never had mental health issues, never been violent. Once she left he went bat crap again. She got administration to release him, and when she returned he was a kind gentle older man again. No known history of mental health issue. Toxicology report negative. My wife was as agnostic. She never believed in evil until him. She believes in evil now. I knew a woman who ran a crappy little town in the boonies like she was the Roadhouse movie bad guy. She'd even toss young girls to older creepers, and if they complained she'd tell them to get used to it because that's life as a woman. The spin was that she was super religious and thought that she was an angel of God here to midwife in the second coming, though the details of that were a little unclear. Not that I was exactly in her inner circle. It was scary how much of that town she controlled: the newspaper, the police, the doctors, everybody. Henry Hopper, Dennis Hopper's son, and his group of friends. Everyone in Venice Beach CA art scene knows at least 100 people, and everyone helps and enables. It's sick. It's disgusting. I've gone to the police with recordings of audio, them recalling stories of their conquests while laughing about how they hurt little girls. I'm told there's nothing they can do about it, while he and his friends brag about how they're untouchable and the police work for them. If you are a girl or a young woman in LA, do not accept a drink or drugs in Venice Beach. Do not pass out at a house party in Venice. There is a cult today. People think it's somewhat fringe religion, but it's really just a large cult. Yes, it actually kills people. It makes a sacrifice out of its members by brainwashing them into refusing a basic, life-saving medical treatment, so that even young children die on the altar of their otherness. Going beyond that, it destroys families and lives with its evil policies, and was just sued in a very high-profile lawsuit headed by the Zolkin law firm because of their institutional protection of child sex abusers. I have no animosity to those trapped in the cult. They are all victims. I was raised in it and used to believe before I woke up, so I understand being trapped that way. But the cult itself? It's pure evil. Let me introduce you to Jehovah's Witnesses. I hope the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society burns. I had never met a real-life sociopath before moving together with my ex. She was so good at manipulating everyone around her that even when she was completely destroying someone's life, she had coaxed her close circle so everyone was rooting for her. She used every possible support group and whatever to her benefits. Religious groups, groups against violence towards women, you name it, she was in there and using them to either direct benefits or just mental support and gaslighting her victims. She'd try to marry as soon as possible, then bleed as much money as possible from her husband, then try to get more after the divorce. She'd also do a very thorough smear campaign against her husband, so they'd get no support. Her go-to trick was getting bruised, then loudly and publicly deny anything had happened to me, then drop hints that the husband sometimes gets a bit angry but it's okay, she loves him. That just made so many people be like, OMG, you're being abused by your horrible, physically violent husband and you don't even see it for yourself. Meanwhile, the guy had no way defending himself. I'm so glad her trying to force a marriage didn't work and I managed to bail out early. She's now in her mid-30s and been married 6 times so far. I got arrested when I was younger and wound up county jail for a bit. When you first get transferred there from the police station holding, you end up seeing a judge who sets your bail. The whole thing is done from inside the jail and through a TV screen, so you never see the judge or your public defendant in person. It was my first time doing this whole thing and I was sticking nearby this guy that went by Repo, who had been in and out of jail before. We're waiting for our turn in front of the judge and there is this kid ahead of us. They really didn't care much about privacy, so you could hear the whole thing if you were next in line. This kid was barely 18 years old, like just a week over, and he had a rap sheet that was extremely long. They get to the current charge that he was in there for, which was allegedly smacking a brick over the head of an elderly man and robbing him. I was very surprised by that, but I was even more surprised at how Repo reacted to this. Even though he had been in and out of the system for all sorts of crimes and had met a ton of other criminals, something like that was over the top for him, especially since this kid was so young. The kid didn't even have any sort of regret. He was smiling the whole time like it was a joke. He put an elderly man in the hospital over a few bucks and was probably only going to get worse from then on. Yep, my godfather's ex-wife. I refuse to call her my godmother. She cheated on him and he caught them in their home. Fine. People make mistakes. I wouldn't say that's true evil, but the way she handled it was, she first poisoned the 2 younger kids, teenagers at the time, against their father, and they have since then stopped talking to him. She then started bad-mouthing him all over town, saying he was controlling and abusive and making up a bunch of other lies. For example, a few days after they separated, he went to visit their older son who was living alone to clear his head a bit. But she started saying he had hidden money from her and went on an expensive cruise to spend it so she wouldn't get anything in the divorce. Which was moronic cause he's actually in a lot of debt. Granted, I don't know if he was in so much in debt at the time of the separation, but he was the only breadwinner of the house and he still had to pay alimony and childcare, so things were tough for him and the debt must have gotten out of hand. Anyway, she's a grade AC. You don't do that to a person you've been married to for like 25 years. Especially when you're the one who cheated. Yay, my stepdad literally killed someone, didn't care in the slightest. It was an accident, but still. My mom, after years of taking his abuse, finally left him and he sent my sister, his daughter, a message saying it's all her fault. Car got stuck in a river that was raging after a storm. We walked to the nearest house, probably about a mile away. We asked to use the phone to call a tow truck. We waited in the living room with a young man and his wife and 2 kids. The wife gave us lemonade and we chatted with them. Tow truck came and we left. About a month later, the husband shot and killed the wife and kids. No reason was ever given. He seemed like a nice guy. Nothing odd about him. Couldn't believe it when I saw him on the news. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.